Doom 3 was a weird entry in a long-established franchise. Dark, slow, and with a focus on environmental navigation and horror elements, it didn't sit well with a lot of classic Doom fans that were expecting a run-and-gun jaunt against hundreds of demons in huge labyrinthine spaces. Whilst I do have my problems with the game, it has a soft spot in my heart, and stands high on some of its own merits. Whilst a later revision of the game, the BFG edition, did make some major changes such as having a shoulder-mounted flashlight, ammo being higher in count and being able to hold more, these were more of a band-aid approach that didn't tackle some of the issues people had with Doom 3's core design and gameplay philosophies. Personally, I've learned to play the game extremely aggressively, with a lot of speed and momentum, and make the experience more action-focused. However, this is something that took my own initiative and learning the ins and outs of the game's mechanics and systems, and not necessarily intended by its software. Split reception and a rocky legacy amongst fans is likely why Doom 4 was scrapped and rebuilt, as leaked footage shows that this game was much more militaristic in its visual language, and drab as you would expect from the intended generation, and seemed more like a post-apocalyptic survival game than a power fantasy run-and-gun. Naturally, when finally metamorphosizing into its final form, the eventual Doom 2016 would rebuild itself as a spiritual successor to the classic DNA of the series, with a focus on heavy metal album Wet Dreams for its visual designs, intense gore, and an aggressive playstyle that painted a dance macabre in the fixated eyes of old and new fans alike. Doom 2016 hit the nail on the head for embracing old-school design philosophy with new-age user experience and visuals. With the classic games being fondly remembered, and Doom 2016 being the near-universally accepted new face of the series, Doom 3 sits in a strange position. Considered revolutionary for its time and its technology, and loved by a fraction of the fanbase by people such as myself, it's still shrugged off by a majority of Doom lovers as the weird one that almost ruined everything. Recently, however, I discovered an alternate take on the experience that's been sitting under our noses the entire time. Doom 3, despite being a pusher for high-end PC technology, did manage to slither into the vents of Microsoft's original Xbox console. The only console that cut even close to being able to run the game, it made the transition with a surprising amount of changes and added content. A port managed by Activision developer Vicarious Visions, known today for their work on Insane Trilogy and the Skylanders series, a major addition to the game was the ability to play through the campaign in co-op with 2 players. There's a good chance you already knew about this, and you probably also knew that there had to be concessions to the level design, whether it be the size of maps or cut elements to keep the game performing. Recently, despite not having a second player to go through it with me, I decided to boot up a System Link lobby to at least peek into this mode solo to see some of the changes for myself. What I can safely say though is that the sheer amount of modifications and accommodations made for an entirely different playstyle floored me. This is noticeable from the immediate beginning. Instead of being forced to sit through an unskippable cutscene and dialogue, the player is immediately able to run around and progress through the opening chapter at their own pace. At no point are you forced to listen to the expository dialogue, neither are you given a PDA to sort through emails and voice logs, and there's not a single locker or door code to be found. You simply walk to the next objective where you get your first weapons. Now, unfortunately, this is where I hit a dead end. The game would not let me progress past the initial weapons locker without a second player taking their equipment. I jumped around, tried to take the other weapon, did everything I could to try to force the game along, but no luck. Disheartened, I returned to the lobby. It was here though that I noticed a feature I hadn't previously seen, the ability to choose from any chapter in the game's campaign and start from here. With trepidatious excitement, I began the next level and anxiously awaited another dead end. But from this point on, the game doesn't check to see if another player is playing. You can play the entire co-op campaign by yourself, and boy what a different ride it is. I expected the levels to be shorter or smaller, but what I didn't expect that like 90% of the original game's irritating backtracking, confusing navigation, and irritating set pieces have been removed. You can imagine my relief when I realized I wouldn't have to ride that stupid lift or go through 5 different teleporters a bunch of times without any proper signposting. Even when you die, the game simply takes you back to a checkpoint, and you have to fight your way back to your death point with limited equipment to get your old loadout back, which means you don't have to rely on the game's horrible save system, and never feel like you have to resort to save scumming. Even the boss fights are far more streamlined, with the Hell Guardian being a direct one-on-one fight, instead of relying on damaging the Seekers and attacking the weak spot. The battle against the Hell Knights in the first Hell Portal is also more of a raid, with the game sending out pairs of them wave by wave. Overall, despite the dumbed down maps and simpler level design, you're going to be fighting larger troops of demons than you would in the base game. This is likely to accommodate the intended presence of 2 Marines, but as a single player experience it strikes a perfect balance of difficulty and engagement that never leaves you wandering around without a fight to pick. Unfortunately though, not every change is for the best, so let's talk about some of the cool stuff you won't be doing. The biggest omission is the BFG 9000. It doesn't appear at any point during co-op. Whether it's because 2 Marines with BFGs could floor an entire combat sequence in 2 shots, or because players kept killing each other in playtesting, it's not here, there, or anywhere. You also won't be using the Soul Cube at any point, and whilst a confusing omission for the story purpose, which is very noticeable during the final fight against the Cyber Demon, it's not something you're going to end up needing because of the increased number of pickups and health stations. This one could be better or worse depending on the kind of player you are, but there's no difficulty option for co-op either. The game simply presents you with an intended difficulty level, which while perfect for myself, might be overwhelming for less experienced players and a little bit of a slog for pros and speedrunners. Then again, I'm not sure how many Doom 3 esports pros there are in the world. Some of the demon introductions do feel a little neutered without their cutscenes or set pieces as well. If this is your first time playing the game too, you're probably going to get confused when your first experience with a Mancubus is them simply waddling out of the shadows. A couple of boss fights are also missing. You won't be fighting the Spider Lady or the Tank Dude, which are honestly take it or leave it battles in my personal opinion. You also won't be going on the surface of Mars at any point. That's up to you how much of a loss that is. id Tech 3 was never really good at rendering outside environments, and even back when the game first released, they were significantly less impressive than the richly decorated and sharply lit corridors of the UAC base. Performance is also pretty rocky, and this could be an effect of playing on the 360, but there seems to be a juddering effect on the player camera whilst moving. It fades out of being noticeable whilst in combat, but in a quieter moment, it can be pretty distracting. Instead of being a traditional co-op mode, it mirrors the experience of arcade mode in Doom 2016 in a myriad of surprising ways, stripping the story elements almost entirely, putting the power of progression in the player's hands, allowing any level to be played at any time, and making concessions to the amount of in-level distractions to keep a focus on fast, furious combat. It's a solid, accessible, and fun way to replay the game, that touches on all the major nostalgic moments without the frustrations or restriction of the original experience. This being said, I would still stick to the single player version if it's your first time playing. As an atmospheric, corridor-crawling sci-fi horror, Doom 3 still stands strong on its own merits, and there are plenty of thrills to be had for first-timers. For those of us who have grown tired of following the sentry down the corridor, using the crane machine, or the entirety of Delta Labs, you can't go wrong with putting on this unofficially official arcade mode and shooting some demons in the damn face.